Your favorite American bourbon might have just vanished from the shelves in one of its biggest markets. Overnight, a multi-million-dollar industry was thrown into chaos. But the reason why has nothing to do with the whiskey itself. It's an act of pure political payback, marking the start of an unprecedented whiskey war that could put thousands of Americans out of a job. This isn't just a headline. For an iconic American industry, it's a fight for survival. The question is, can it survive? This whole story kicked off not with a bang, but with a memo. In March of 2025, a directive went out to the government-run liquor stores across several of Canada's most populous provinces, including the economic giant, Ontario. The order was simple and brutal. Take all American-made whiskey, wine, and beer off the shelves. Immediately. For decades, Canada had been one of the most reliable and lucrative markets for American spirits. That partnership, built on shared tastes and friendly trade, was shattered in an instant. This wasn't a warning shot. It was a declaration of economic war, with bourbon bottles and whiskey barrels caught right in the crossfire. To get how severe this is, you have to understand how booze is sold in most of Canada. Unlike the US, where private stores are everywhere, many Canadian provinces have government-owned monopolies. The Liquor Control Board of Ontario, or LCBO, isn't just a regulatory body, it's one of the biggest buyers of alcohol on the planet. With over 650 stores, its decisions don't just influence the market, they are the market. So when the LCBO is told by the government to stop buying your product, you are, for all intents and purposes, banned. And that's the crucial part. This wasn't a tariff. A tariff is a tax. It makes a product more expensive, but you can still buy it. What Canada did was far more severe. A procurement ban, a complete delisting of American products. It's a move that's legally unchallengeable at the World Trade Organization. It is clean, surgical, and devastatingly effective. So why the drastic move? Pure retaliation. It was a direct response to a 25% tariff the Trump administration had imposed on a whole slate of Canadian goods, including steel, aluminum, lumber, and cars. The US argued the tariffs were needed to protect American industries. Canada saw it as an aggressive, unprovoked attack on their economy. They weren't just going to take it. They decided to hit back where it would send a clear and painful message to Washington. They took American whiskey hostage. But why bourbon? Of all the products in the vast US economy, why was this amber spirit, this icon of American craftsmanship, singled out for political execution? The answer is in what bourbon represents. It's not just a drink. It's a political symbol with deep roots in the American heartland. A full 95% of the world's bourbon is produced in one state, Kentucky. This geographic concentration makes it an incredibly precise tool for inflicting political pain. When you target bourbon, you aren't targeting the entire American economy. You're aiming a laser beam straight at the bluegrass state. And that's no accident. It's a calculated move in a high-stakes game of political chess. Trade retaliation works best when it's both economically significant and politically visible. Bourbon checks both boxes perfectly. Kentucky's bourbon industry is a $9 to $10 billion economic engine that supports over 22,500 jobs. And those aren't just distillery workers. They're corn farmers, truck drivers, barrel makers, and the thousands of people in tourism and hospitality. That industry is woven into the very fabric of the state's economy, and politicians know it. When a foreign power attacks bourbon, it creates instant, intense political pressure on Kentucky's representatives in Washington. Governor Andy Beshear of Kentucky immediately slammed the move, calling it an unnecessary trade war with an ally. Representative Morgan McGarvey, chair of the Congressional Bourbon Caucus, blamed the chaotic trade policies coming out of the White House, projecting tens of millions of dollars would be lost in Ontario alone. This is the cold logic of modern trade warfare. You don't carpet bomb an economy. You find a signature product, a cultural export that's concentrated in a politically important area, and you squeeze. You turn an industry's own workers and owners into an unwilling lobbying force, pressuring their own government to back down. Canada's choice was deliberate. They knew headlines about struggling Kentucky distilleries would get Washington's attention in a way statistics about steel imports never could. They weaponized America's own iconic product against it. The message was clear. Your tariffs on our steel will be paid for by your distillers. When Canada pulled the plug, the economic fallout wasn't gradual. It was immediate and catastrophic. Before the ban, Canada was the second largest export market for American spirits, buying about $250 million worth of products every year. By the end of 2025, that number had cratered by nearly 70%, plummeting to just $89 million. In the rankings of export destinations, Canada fell from second place all the way down to sixth. The speed of the collapse was breathtaking. In the crucial 10-month period from March to December 2025, exports to Canada fell to a meager $60 million, down from $203 million during the same period the year before. That's a $143 million hole blown in the industry's balance sheet, all thanks to a political feud. But behind these staggering numbers is a much more tangible reality, the sight of countless barrels stacked to the ceiling in warehouses across Kentucky. This is the whiskey that was supposed to be on a truck heading north. Instead, it's just sitting there, collecting dust. In Ontario alone, an estimated $80 million worth of American spirits were caught in limbo, with another $2 million worth simply expiring in government warehouses. The shockwave ripped through the entire supply chain. It hit the big producers, with giants like Jim Beam announcing a pause in distillation at its main Kentucky campus for 2026, a direct response to the sales crisis. It hit the smaller craft distillers even harder. Victor Yarbrough, CEO of Bro Brothers Distillery in Louisville, said they were in the middle of negotiating a deal with a Canadian province when the ban came down, instantly killing the contract. For a small, family-owned business, losing access to a major market isn't just a setback, it's an existential threat. What makes this uniquely painful for the bourbon industry is time. Bourbon isn't like other products. You can't just turn a dial up or down to meet demand. It's a product that has to be aged, often for 4 years or more. Distillers have to bet on where they think demand will be half a decade from now. They are, in essence, placing a multi-year, multi-million-dollar wager every time they fill a barrel. A sudden trade war completely upends that delicate math. How do you plan for the future when one of your largest markets can be wiped out overnight? The uncertainty is poison. Do you cut production and risk a massive shortage in 4 years if things go back to normal? Or do you keep producing and risk being stuck with millions of gallons of unsellable whiskey if the trade war drags on? There are no easy answers. The jobs of corn farmers, loggers, and distillery workers all hang in the balance of this impossible equation. For the American whiskey industry, this whole crisis felt like a brutal case of déjà vu. This wasn't the first time they'd been caught in the crossfire of a trade dispute they didn't start. Back in 2018, the European Union hit American whiskey with a 25% retaliatory tariff in response to US steel and aluminum tariffs. the impact was severe. Kentucky's exports to the EU, its largest market, were slashed by 35%. Even after those tariffs were suspended, the market still hasn't fully recovered. Now, with the Canadian ban, the industry found itself fighting a devastating war on two fronts. One of its most important partners had imposed crippling tariffs, and its other closest ally had just slammed the door shut entirely. It was a perfect storm of market chaos. The industry's response was a mix of fury and frustration. Chris Swanger, the CEO of the Distilled Spirits Council of the US, Discuss, called the Canadian ban over the top and masochistic. He pointed out that Canadian provinces were also hurting themselves by losing out on millions in tax revenue. His organization started lobbying hard for a zero-for-zero tariff agreement, urging everyone to go back to the way things were. Meanwhile, Eric Gregory, president of the Kentucky Distillers Association, tried to project a sense of resilience. "We've survived prohibition," he noted, a reminder that the industry has faced existential threats before. But he also stressed the immense danger of the current situation, warning that these trade wars jeopardize years of growth and investment. The pain was becoming very real. Angel's Envy master distiller Owen Martin talked about the upstream effects, with disruptions hitting everyone from shipping companies to ingredient suppliers. It was clear the industry was a pawn in a much bigger game. American distillers, who had nothing to do with disputes over steel or lumber, were now the primary casualties. One day they had a thriving export market, the next, the border was sealed. From the Canadian perspective, this was a feature, not a bug. While some smaller provinces quietly began restocking American products by June 2025, feeling the hit to their own revenues, Ontario held firm. The government made it clear that the pain felt by the US whiskey industry was the direct and intended consequence of American trade policy. This left American distillers in an impossible position, fighting for political relief at home while trying to survive in a global market that had suddenly turned hostile. Section 5. The Geopolitical Endgame. As painful as it is, this whiskey war isn't really about whiskey. It's about leverage. Those empty shelves in Ontario are a bargaining chip in a high-stakes negotiation that will shape the future of North American trade. The whole conflict is now tangled up in the fate of the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA. This massive trade pact, governing nearly $2 trillion in annual commerce, is up for a mandatory joint review in July 2026. This isn't just a routine checkup. It's the moment where all three countries have to decide whether to extend the deal for another 16 years, renegotiate it, or let it eventually expire. That review has become the main battlefield. The bourbon ban is now one of Canada's most powerful weapons. Their position is brutally simple. You want your whiskey back? Then we need a lasting deal on steel, on softwood lumber, and on the fundamental rules of our trade relationship. What one US official initially dismissed as a mere irritant has become a major roadblock to renewing the entire agreement. So far, meetings between President Trump and Canadian leaders haven't produced an easy off-ramp. The US is demanding major concessions, while Canada is using the very real pain of the bourbon industry to show it won't back down. The distillers are just caught in the middle, their future tied to complex negotiations completely out of their control. This whole situation shows how the world works now. It's not just about efficient supply chains anymore. It's about identifying and exploiting vulnerabilities. An iconic cultural product, a symbol of American craftsmanship, has been turned into a tool of coercion. The health of an entire industry has been made conditional on solving disputes about something completely different, like steel. The barrels of bourbon aging silently in Kentucky warehouses are a liquid monument to this new, volatile world order. So here we are. A trade war that started over raw materials has devolved into a bitter fight in the aisles of liquor stores. A political decision in Washington led to a retaliatory strike from Ottawa, and an American industry is in crisis. We've seen a nearly 70% collapse in exports to a once loyal partner, a $143 million loss in just 10 months, and tens of thousands of jobs hanging in the balance. The bourbon ban is holding, the barrels are waiting, and the high-stakes USMCA negotiations are looming. This story reveals a fundamental truth about our world. The products we buy and the jobs we hold are more tied to global politics than we think. A dispute about steel can grind a distillery to a halt. The fate of an industry can become a bargaining chip. The whiskey war isn't just about whiskey, it's about the weaponization of everything. If you want to understand more about how these hidden economic battles are reshaping our world, make sure to subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the forces that are really driving global events.